And we don't have like an intro talk, so I guess we can start. Does anybody have anything they want to talk about before the meeting? Any Clojure questions from? Has anybody been doing anything interesting? Here's what I've been doing. I discovered this thing, code review. So I found out, so we're all familiar with Stack Overflow, but it turns out there's there's a whole bunch of Stack stuff, and I don't know how any of this stuff works, but I stumbled across Stack Exchange code review, and I found out there were Clojure questions on here. Let's see if I can find, I don't know how to use this, but if I tag it, there we go.
Risk of ending up on the WTF, do you?
I'm sorry, what?
If you post it on it.
So this is actually pretty cool because I spent my whole weekend instead of actually doing work, I spent my whole weekend doing code reviews for random people for things they posted a year ago, right? So anyways, if you've got Clojure, yes, here's one of mine, right?
You knew it was a year old, or you...
Well, yeah, I mean there wasn't a whole lot going on. Well, this one was recent. So some of them were apparently this thing has been around for a while. There's a few asked. Okay, this one was asked on 2013. That's 2013. A couple of these. So yeah, some of these it's been around for at least a year. So I didn't. I only I tried to only answer the ones where I had something that I thought was reasonably interesting. But this is kind of cool. So how we've been doing our code review things, before some meetings. If you've got something, maybe in the future we can use that as kind of a mechanism to communicate and ask questions and get other people to weigh in. This is one I was going to look at later because there's some bonus points, and I don't know how points work. So if somebody actually uses these sites, then let me know because I don't know how any of this actually works. Here, let me find my my questions here. Yeah, so I'll show you a few of these that were interesting. Yeah, so this was a fun one. This guy made was trying to make sort of a testing DSL, the describe it, right? And had put together these macros. So before I do this, I'm just curious if what people think of these particular macros. So if you take a look at these,
can you blow it a little bit?
Does it go up? I don't know how much more it can go.
That's good.
Is that good?
That's pretty good.
Yeah. So I was looking at this, and so the goal. So of course, this sort of style of testing is very common. Ruby, JavaScript, those places. Not so common in Clojure. So he was I'll just let this hang for a second. So the goal here is to be able to have something that he can talk about, right? So you describe the number 42, and later you want to talk about it and say it's 42. 99 is not equal to 42, right? So you have some context. And he was doing this. This guy was doing it with a ref, right? So that's why he's doing the do sync and dereferencing the entity and doing that, right? So anyways, this was a really good question. This was a really good one, I thought, because it was okay, well, that's like a standard use case for dynamic binding, right? And so I cleaned up, I redid it using dynamic binding, right? Using a dynamic, and simplified the macros considerably, right? So. Yeah, so I thought this was actually a quite a fun one, and kind of the level of things you can get into on these sites. So yeah, I wasn't planning to talk about this, but because we're still waiting for DAR. And so here was another good one. Somebody was doing some maze stuff and had some kind of he just had some code, and so. I made some suggestions about how to improve that. So anyways, take a look at it, and if you've got things, I'll post it up because I had a lot of fun. Unfortunately, there's there's not that many questions out there. So I guess I don't know what I'm going to do next weekend. I guess I can do my real work. All right. Well, we're still waiting here. Euro Clojure videos were out. Did anybody have a chance to watch any of these? Euro Clojure 2015?
I watched the Omnags.
That was pretty interesting. I was kind of surprised where he was where he was taking that. It's basically like, okay, remember all this stuff that I just told you and we did with Ohm? Yeah, we're gonna do something different.
And watched number 4.
Which one? Real world open source application in Clojure.
Yeah, that was.
Wait, who was that? Oh, hey, Dar's here. Which company was that? It says I watched it, but I don't remember anything about it.
He made an app and put it up. The app is open source.
Oh, okay.
So you can go look at it.
Oh, open source application. That's why I couldn't remember the company it was about. Oh, apparently I'm 20 minutes in, so I guess it didn't make much of an impression on me. Oh, you can actually hear it.
So it's just a synchronization point so that we know.
Almost. All right. Well, I did enjoy that one, and I watched the Micro Canron one and a few of them.
What's the key search word?
I'm sorry, what?
What's the search word? How are you getting these on YouTube?
It's on the Clojure TV channel. So all the Clojure conferences, they just came out like 5 days ago. So it would have been easy to miss. There's actually a few interesting ones. I've got a few of them queued up on my list. All right, Dar, nobody has any Clojure Q&A, or do you need a few minutes to get set up?
I'm still trying to jump over to the Capital Factory network.
All right.
I have a question, but if it takes too long.
Does it involve Tayo the little bus?
It does not.
Oh man, this is an awesome cartoon, by the way, just to derail
So
this.
let's watch this cartoon first.
I'm really looking forward to reading your report.
Well, we gotta watch an ad. Oh, here we go. Yeah.
really
It's
looking forward to that.
this is Korean cartoon about buses.
A day in the life of Tayo.
All right, so when you have an 18-month-old, yeah, this becomes okay. Anyways, just putting that out there, for somebody can give me a Clojure API for Tayo the little bus, maybe. Sorry.
So this might be kind of a new question, but whatever. Ambrose Fund started trying to raise a bunch of money to do the whole gradual typing thing for Clojure. I don't understand what the difference is between core typed and what it is he's proposing to build now. I don't have a strong enough background with that kind of stuff where it makes sense to me. He explained it in the video, and I'm familiar with some of these words, but that's about it. So.
Yeah, I thought he was just planning to do just more of that, right? So let me see. Where was it? He put out. No, he had a.
He had a Kickstarter.
Is it Indiegogo maybe?
Or maybe it was Indiegogo.
Core typed kids.
So I had to look up what gradual typing was, and it sounded like what there already was.
Yeah, I thought he was just trying to continue work on it. Has anybody looked too much into what more he's doing? Sorry. Anyone? No. Yeah, because I know he was doing more. Just more. Yeah, I think he was just trying to. I thought my understanding. Now, I didn't watch any of this. I funded one of the earlier ones, but I haven't come back to see what he's doing now. But I thought he was just trying to continue continue that work and to make it a little bit more get tooling support and get a little bit more going with it.
How much is it up to?
35,000. So it's completely funded. Oh, this is the old one. Well, that's why it might
That's
have.
the old one.
I was going to say this doesn't look like anything.
Yeah, it's he was just looking for 10,000 this time. I have the link. It's on Indiegogo.
Okay.
It just says gradual typing for Clojure, so maybe.
Okay, so let's. Well, somewhere there should be something. Gradual typing for Clojure.
He sort of updated the README with a couple of things that make more sense now.
Oh, okay. So I'll say rather than trying to look at it and guess, I'll say I haven't looked at exactly what he's trying to do there. So sounds like we've got a topic for somebody to look into and report back. I'm somewhat interested in it, but I was sort of let down. I mean, I won't say I was let down by the typing, but I found like I was really excited to give it a try, and then I put it in, and it was just sort of. You could either use it in a small space that was just like completely isolated from your application, or you couldn't really use it, right? Or you had to develop your whole thing around the types. So he may be, I mean, I can only guess that he's trying to improve the usability to make it work, or you can type the parts of your application that you're interested in and without impacting other things. But yeah, I don't know. Is that the air conditioner?
Yeah. We're taxiing over there.
All my hot air, right? All right. Are you ready, Dar? Any other? Sorry. So I guess the short answer is nobody knows. So.
Is it last question period? Just to stuff
Yeah, this is Q&A.
Topics.
This is. Did you have a topic?
No, I'm just saying that stuff when you get topics.
Yeah.
I don't know. Perhaps you should speak.
Well, I am curious. I may spend some time. I didn't realize he was trying to do anything different. I thought he was just trying to find more of like exactly the same thing, which is good. But I
guess what threw me off is that the first sentence of it says the next step for types closure is gradual typing, and so I just figured he's adding something either new or different or whatever.
Protect the invariance of statically typed coding at runtime. Okay, so So that's interesting. So that to me implies, like, I mean, right now core typed is basically all like basically compile time. You like check your code in advance, and either it's good or bad, and that's it. And does protect the invariance of static type code at runtime is trying to basically say like, okay, it's actually gonna like like runtime checking of types and things like that. So type closure will be enhanced to contain ill-typed foreign code before it can compromise. That sounds okay. Enforce annotations for foreign code at runtime and protect type code from foreign callers with runtime contracts. Yeah, so I mean, you make your types code, and I guess it'll check the things that it's gonna check the values as they come in. So.
Do you know how it would be like different from Scala? Because I know like Scala has types.
Scala is everything is typed.
Yeah.
Or, no, but like if you typed everything in Clojure, like how much different would it be from like Scala?
Well, from a type system perspective, I guess it wouldn't be much different, except for like all the Scala libraries are typed, and the whole ecosystem sort of is friendly towards that. Do I?
Would it be readable?
I don't know about that.
Yeah, I don't know. As messy as Scala code can be, all those type annotations in Clojure are not. I'm not sure I would hold that up as the paragon of readability there. So, but I mean, I haven't had much luck with it. I mean, I tried it a couple times. I'm like, I could use it like starting from scratch, and like, okay, that's
like dynamic typing. It's either you like one works in your brain and one doesn't. It's like that's just
Well, as a Java programmer for so many years, I mean, and not that I can hold up Java as type system as being like anything, work. But I mean, I was able to work productively in a typed environment. When I moved to Clojure, I was able to work productively in an untyped, in a dynamically typed environment, right? So I mean, I guess I mean, I've sort of grown skeptical of people who have too strong of an opinion about about typing, right? Like like you'll see, like if I go when I've been to the Haskell meetup, I've talked to a couple of the guys, and they're just like they're hardcore, like type. I'm like, okay, types are great. I mean, I use them; they're great. I'm like, and then I come over to the list, where I'm like, but I can work just fine without it. But then you talk to, say, I don't know, Sam, right? And he was like, dynamic, no static, right? I'm like, okay, well, it's great, but like I can do both, right? I mean, you use the tools you have effectively, and I guess I've stopped having a big care.
Sam's he's at the opposite pole from, say, Sukhan, right?
Yeah. Well, those were exactly the two people I was mentally modeling here.
Sukhan's argument would be that it's Dijkstra-ism, right? You should be able to mathematically prove your program is correct at the compile stage.
By the way, Dijkstra, I just tracked down this. A discipline of programming. Edgar Dijkstra.
Yes.
Anyways, I'm reading that now. So. Anyways, sorry.
But yeah, and Sam's like, there's no way that the advantage of what the type system gives you would compete with the elegance and the quickness of being able to hammer out the dynamic.
Well, yeah, but in my mind, it's like, well, you just get your benefits in one place or the other, right? Like, do you fill up with gas before or after, right? I mean, like, if you got enough to make the trip, it doesn't really matter, right? You're gonna pay for it either way, right? You're gonna take the costs, right? I mean, like Clojure's great. I mean, it really lets you get things going rapidly, but you pay the cost for that in places, and in other systems you pay the cost for that up front, and and later as you're, it may make some things easier and it makes some things harder. So I'm no longer convinced that one approach that either approach is better than the other. They're just,
That you always have to evaluate it in context.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, although now, I do find that some of the things that Lisp style dynamic programming give, in that flexible, extensible runtime, the ability to REPL into things, that kind of stuff that buys you, the ability to jump in and test things around that you don't get in a lot, in a lot of the environments for these settings. I mean, I find that really, really nice. I guess maybe I'm leaning towards that style.
Just touched on a few cases where being able to compile at runtime has a benefit.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, now I get it.
Well, it's really, I have to say, I used to be the kind of person who's like, that just scared me, right? When people would talk about going into a running system and changing it, I'm like, no, you write your code, you compile it, you make a new version, you deploy it, you know what everything is, right? But like being able to jump into a system, I think I was showing Dara something last week where we were having some email issues, and I actually got into the server and I could actually let's inspect these values as they're going through the live system. We did it, right? We looked at, here's the problem. Okay, here's what the fix should be. We're able to take a look at it and like, okay, let's make this. We're able to patch that on the fly, and then the new value. It's like, all that's right. We didn't have to recompile. We didn't have to redeploy, right? I took that later and we made a fix and pushed it out, and we went through all the proper things, but I was able to get in there. I was like, that is pretty amazing. I mean, I don't know how I can live. I mean, that would be a tough thing to live without, to actually have to go back to a language where you had to, shut down the server to deploy code or something, right? That's pretty scary. Or just being able to see and inspect things live as they're going through. I mean, that was pretty powerful. I mean, you were sold, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
In REPL forever.
Yeah, exactly. I love the REPL. So I will say that if your statically typed language doesn't have a REPL of some sort, doesn't have that, then it's definitely inferior. Not because it has its types, but because it's a terrible environment to work in.
So speaking of REPL, have you played with Gorilla REPL?
Only like a long time. You were talking about it a long time. Like when you talked
Anyone
about
else?
it. Has anybody tried Gorilla REPL?
It's on my list.
That's the notebook style, right?
Right. And as far as I can tell, it relies on Clojure on the back end.
Yeah.
But with the advent of Clojure script and Clojure script, I'd really like to have my hands on an eval and an apply in an entirely Clojure script environment with no Clojure backend. And it doesn't look like we're quite there yet.
Yeah, so I think somebody had signed up for a lightning talk on this and never did it. I don't remember who it was. It wasn't you, I'm sure. Although you had said you would be interested in talking about it, but somebody I think signed up for it and never did it. So, yeah. Was it anybody in here who wants to admit it? Wants to make it up? No? Well, so if somebody wants to talk idea, Gorilla REPL. I'm curious. All right, you ready? Unless anything else, anybody? Going once, going twice? You want to actually hear about APIs?
Yes.
All right. Oh, were you taking over? Excellent. All right, so this is Dara. He's going to talk about.
We get one
You
part
can.
of the presentation.
Yeah.
Like one.
Yeah. Sometimes if you shut the script, like if you change resolutions, you gotta shut the bring it down, and redo it. There you go. So he's going to talk about actually using Liberator in a real production code.
Okay, so this presentation has like 4 parts to it. The first 2 are like external review. We're going to review HTTP basics, and then we're going to go over REST principles. And after that, we're going to review some Liberator guidelines. And then we're actually going to look at some live Liberator code. Should have plenty of time, so feel free to interrupt, ask questions, whatever you like. Okay, so HTTP is this language that we use to connect everything on the internet. Has anyone not used HTTP at all before?
Never heard of it.
Okay. These next few slides might seem really.
It's like the Holy Grail.
Can you compare that to Gopher and like that?
I don't understand Gopher, so I can't.
Marshy and Brock.
There you go. Let's hear a competition from who can come up with the most old school protocol there.
So there's like this OSI model, which stands for like the Open Standards for Interconnectivity, which talks about the different layers that's used to connect applications. So this is where HTTP sits. As a web developer, this is really what you're doing. You're developing HTTP. I've never had to develop any TCP or anything with the rendering, but occasionally maybe you look at networks to watch stuff go across. But this is where we sit. So just keep that in mind. This is what a request looks like. It's the standard structure. There's a start line. Starts off with a request method with a URL and then a version. 0 or more headers, and then a body. It might look something like this. So it starts off with the request method get. It's pointing to this resource URL, and then specifying the HTTP version that we're on. The headers here are host and content type, and then it's got some body actually included with some data for the request, basically saying give me everything for the last week. Okay, there's 8 basic request methods. A lot of APIs just use the first 4. Maybe when you're developing, you might use the last 3 that I have on there, head, option, and trace. Patch seems to be relatively new and relatively unadopted, but Liberator does support it, so if you have a more advanced API that requires this stuff, it's definitely available for you. In the HTTP spec, it actually talks about safe methods. This is important if you're trying to set up some sort of permissions model with your API, because certain types of users or classes of users would get basically read access, and these methods don't do anything beyond retrieval and possibly logging, so you can rest assured that you can run them as much as you want and you won't, break the interwebs.
Can we cache them?
Come again?
Can we cache them?
Sure. That is an option, and Liberator does support content negotiation, so it's got all that kind of stuff in there.
But is that's a different concept from
I'm sorry,
idempotent, right?
Right.
I mean,
now,
is there? I'm just curious because that distinction of safe and unsafe was sort of new to me, and I'm like, did you get any sense of what why that? It's just. Is it really just like this is a read-only
retrieval only?
No side effect at all, as opposed to
not at all. It does make exceptions for logging, like I said. I guess you could have other things going on there, but basically you can assume that the server is relatively stateless whenever you run this. There's 2 additional methods for what are described as idempotent. You can run these 1 time, or you can run them 1,000 times. It makes no difference. The result will be the same. Right. Questions so far? Okay, this is the standard format of response. The status code is really analogous to the request method, although it's in a slightly different order with the version in the front. The reason phrase is really helpful in case you don't have all your codes memorized. Again, 0 or more optional headers and a body. Might look something like this. A 200 response for OK could include date, content type, and maybe a warm body for the payload. There's 5 classes of response codes. Liberator really just uses the last 4, and it doesn't use the whole set, but it uses basically everything that was mentioned in the REST spec, which was Roy Fielding's doctorate, his dissertation. Okay, and if you want to know more about HTTP, a really good resource is the Definitive Guide on HTTP. If you have a Safari subscription, this is available to you. Any questions about HTTP before we move on? This is all easy. Good. Okay, so now we're going to talk about REST, which of course stands for representational state transfer. It's kind of a mouthful. I like REST better. It's resource-based, which means that the URIs represent things instead of actions. So the endpoint that you're hitting with your API wouldn't be something like increment counter or something like that. It would actually be the counter object, as opposed to some sort of a verb that describes it. So that the endpoint should be nouns if you're setting it up restishly using the proper guidelines. So here's some examples of good and bad endpoints based on the REST guidelines. A good one would be cars followed by some sort of ID like a GUID to denote this particular car. A bad one would be using query params to delineate the object or the thing that you're trying to specify in your API. Here's some other things that could be good or bad. If you wanted to set up some properties under your cars, you could maybe have a mileage property, but you wouldn't want to have an endpoint like get mileage or set mileage. Get and set are really to be handled by the request verbs, like get, put, and handle these.
So the reason you consider the first /API bad is because the information about what you're doing, like it's just /API, you know, there's not really a resource, it's just sort of like everything, every type, every action is being channeled through one endpoint, right?
Right.
It's not the use of parameters, right? It's the
no, you can use parameters, but there should be some sort of thing that you're working with that's denoted by the endpoint, other than, I suppose, your API. I'm having a hard time imagining a case where the API would be the thing that you would want to hit. There may be exceptions to this. Again, REST is just guidelines.
I think sometimes like one of those request types was options. Then there's like the informational response that you can get back. I guess you could make an options request to the API to get back like information about the API itself. Like I've actually seen that once.
Yeah, so would you use the options verb to do that?
Yeah.
Okay. Resource routes. It's really important to be consistent whenever you're defining these. So if you wanted to denote an individual user with say a user's list and then a login to specify them, you'd have a hard time then going back and specifying a list under the user's resource of active, because there's potential that a user could set up a new login and use active as their name, basically. And so which one would you be hitting? So whenever you set these up, you want to just be careful that you're delineating them properly. Plan for growth. Here's another one that's maybe not so good. If you had a user class, say admin, that was sitting underneath the individual user, putting to that can get kind of messy because admin might not be the only role that you end up with. You could end up with org admins, team lead admins, and all kinds of different users. So it's better in this case to set up a role resource and then put your roles underneath it. And it's okay to use params for a scenario like this as well. So again, you've got some options. REST isn't written in stone with commandments from on high. It's just some basic guidelines.
So there is no real RFC per se, or just the guy? Because I always hear REST people argue about what REST is.
Yeah, and it's so weird. People will say that they're REST experts or whatever. It's sort of like
if there's no RFC.
There isn't. There is a dissertation, and it's all in chapter 5 of his dissertation. So
I'll read the whole thing.
You don't have to read the whole thing. No, it's just one small chapter. You could sit and read it in an hour or so. Yeah, so there is no RFC. There's no hard fast guidelines. So it's a lot of it's open for interpretation, like a lot of things, I guess. But the idea behind it is that REST is trying to make these API endpoints just like any other server or object that you have on the internet, because in essence, the internet runs off of REST. Another thing that REST accounts for is representations. This is just the response from the resource, whatever your response body might be. So typically something like JSON, XML, HTML. REST requires a uniform interface. That's an explicit constraint. It can utilize HTTP, but it doesn't require it. You could use Gopher, I suppose, or FTP or something else. Using HTTP is really good because it delineates the responsibilities between the client and the server pretty well. Again, the actions are the HTTP verbs, and the resource names are the URIs. They represent the nouns and the operations. Another constraint has that that there's statelessness basically on the server. The server doesn't store client context, so you're not passing a bunch of cookies back and forth and opening connections and leaving them open. Although I suppose the web server itself could handle persistent connections if it wanted to. Each request is basically self-contained because of this. You have to have all your identity and all the descriptors of your request in the single request that you send to the server. So the messages are fully self-descriptive. And this actually pushes the session state over to the client, which is probably a better place to handle it in a lot of situations, just because there's a lot of overhead to do that on a server. Okay, so a little more details on the client-server constraint. The server provides resources, and it listens for requests on those resources. It can perform the requests or reject them and send responses to clients. The difference between the client and the server is actually a reactive process. It's waiting for requests in a REST model. And then the client basically desires services to be performed and sends the request to the server. It's a triggering process as opposed to a waiting process. So the separation of concerns with the client-server architecture, you get a disconnected system, so nobody's connecting over your API and getting like a persistent database connection that you're having to provide maintenance for. It simplifies the server overhead again. This will improve scalability because you don't have to manage all of the connections on the server. And then it also moves the UI functionality to the client. I can't imagine just a regular web user interacting with an API. I don't know if you've worked with them much, but curl is your tool of choice, or you can type GET requests into a web browser, but that's about it. This is nice because it allows the UI and the server to evolve independently, so long as the interface between them is constant. If you're on a large team, the UI team can go off and do their thing, and the API team can do theirs completely independent of each other. Okay, it also requires cache. This is one piece that Liberator does have a lot of tools for, but I haven't actually used yet. With the endpoints I've been working with so far, it's not critical at this time. So if you haven't seen cache before, there's time-based constraints. You can say, give a resource a max age. There's also content-based constraints. You could attach an E tag to a resource that you could check later to see if it's been changed somehow. This could be useful because it can reduce the interaction with the server, or could even eliminate it in some situations. You can have intermediaries in between and do some caching that could help reduce the load. It also creates some potential for reducing the data reliability. That's just something that comes along with it. You have to be careful when you're developing this kind of scenario. Okay, and then it's a layered system. Again, there's no assumption of direct connections. This restricts the interaction and reduces the complexity of the interaction between the client and the server. It also probably eliminates some performance gains that you could have in certain scenarios. So REST doesn't make any claim to be like the end-all best API interface, but in certain situations, it certainly is better than just leaving connections out open. Let's see here. Intermediaries can improve scalability. It can add overhead since you're having to open connections and close them when you're doing this kind of stuff. There's different overhead involved in a RESTful system. Another option is code on demand. You can extend logic to the client, so you could maybe compile your Clojure script down and push that out. Certainly, if you were providing HTML, you could also provide some links to JavaScript, maybe through some hypermedia if you're familiar with that, and CSS, and then the consumers of your API could just pull down some boilerplate HTML and work from there. This constraint is specifically noted as being optional. So these are the 6 constraints that REST sets up. If you don't adhere to all 6 of them, then you're not fully REST-ish, but again, it doesn't make the claim to be the one true API style, so that's fine, depending on your scenario.
What is code on demand in this case?
This is where you could, compile down some JavaScript or something like that and actually push it over to the client. So you can extend the logic of the server and put some validation on the client. So the example I was given a moment ago was if you had some boilerplate HTML for your API endpoints, like the example we're going to be going over later is like a log. So maybe somebody's consuming this and they want to see what's in the log, but they don't want to have to go through the trouble of writing a UI for the log. So you could provide them with some boilerplate HTML, and if there's some JavaScript that they need to interact with it on the client side, you could provide that as well.
So just serving out code on it.
Yeah, exactly. Any questions on REST? Okay, there's a cool website, REST API tutorial, if you're interested in learning more about REST. It's got lots of examples, YouTube videos that are great because you can always watch them at 2 times speed, save yourself some time. Okay, so getting into Liberator, it was inspired by the Erlang web machine. And I know you can't read all this, but the idea here is that you take all the REST requirements and you put them down in some sort of a documented flow process. And so you can see there's decision points in here and there's little terminal endpoints. And if you got real close to this, you can see they say things like 404 and 422. So those are your HTTP responses that you're working towards. Liberator has a very similar decision graph that it provides to show how everything's documented. I've turned this one on its side so I can fit it on the screen, but in essence it's the same thing. You've got a bunch of decision functions. There's a few action functions in here that actually change state on the server, and then there's handlers for endpoints for doing things like HTTP responses. Okay, so defining a resource with Liberator looks a lot like defining a map. There's keys and values in here, although there's no squiggly braces. So all those decision points that are on that diagram would actually show up in here. All the actions, all the handlers, you can specify them in here. You can include values for some of them, and you can include functions for others. Here's an example of one, maybe a customer resource. Allowed methods is just telling you what kind of requests this particular endpoint will support. Allowed is actually checking to see what sort of permissions the user might have to access this resource. We'll get into more details on these other decision points, but this is basically what it looks like when you're working with resources in Liberator. Questions so far? Cool. Okay, dry tip number 1, so you don't have to repeat yourself. Set up a base resource. More than likely, all of your resources are going to have, or a lot of your resources are going to have some commonalities between them. It's doubtful that you should be handling authentication or authorization for each resource distinctly. So if you were to put that into a base resource, you could reuse it.
You didn't define a URL or anything in the past one, in the previous one, right? When you did your resource?
No, I haven't. And so really that's something that Composure handles for us. And typically the way we do it, going back to this other example, you can see that it allows these methods, get, head, options, post, put. Usually in Composure what we do is we say any. So whatever resource whatever method you might use will go hit this resource, and then we'll let Liberator decide whether or not the resource is allowed, so it can kick back a method not implemented response.
And the underscore, is that arguments or something?
Yeah, if there are any, they're not. You don't really have to go like this. These could be what do you call it? URL params from Composure. we'll get into like the Liberator map here in a minute, but it has params that document all that, so you don't really need to go through there. Okay, so you could set up a resource map as just a regular map. You just define it like you would in another map, and then in your resource that could be maybe your first line item, and Liberator will go through there and will parse all the keys and values, and we'll add that to any resource that uses this. That should save you some time. There's 32 primary decision functions in Liberator. You can glance over these and kind of imagine how they would be used for different types of responses. Authorized, if you fail this, you're going to get a 401 allowed. If you fail that, you get a 403 forbidden. It allows content negotiation. Some of these, like can, post, and missing, they aren't really obvious until you start looking at the decision graph. But basically, REST and the HTTP spec kind of put this out there as a decision point you have to take into account. And so you get all of these decision points with Liberator so that the handlers that you resolve to as a result of making these decisions are available to you. If you're having to develop these APIs by hand, if you really wanted to have a full RESTful API, you need to account for all these sorts of functions. So it's really nice to have all these available to you. Questions about these? Okay, some functions have convenient declarations, like methods allowed. So instead of actually putting a function as the value for the allowed methods, you can actually pass in a declaration or just a little vector saying, we'll allow these request methods. So it's sort of like some syntactic sugar, just like a little convenience. Okay, typically, these are the actions that you'll be using really for REST. This is all you have. Patch was added kind of recently to Liberator, but these are things that can change some state on the server. Okay, and these are the handler functions and the status codes that correspond to them. There's 27 of them in Liberator. Some of them support redirects, which can be kind of a hassle depending on what kind of HTTP testing tool you're using, because some of them follow redirects and you get responses you might not be expecting. If you're using a redirect, you can specify some sort of function in the location key of your resource. And this will basically show up as a location header. Okay, so everything that interacts in Liberator goes through this context map. And there's 3 primary keys there. There's the request, the resource, and the representation. And I've picked a few little keys out of there so you have an idea as to what you're working with. Basically everything in the request shows up in the request key. And the resource that you're working with, all the decision points, whatever actions are associated with this resource, show up here. And the representation is just the response that you're building up. The context map is a parameter for every function. So in this case, there's an authorized function, and although it doesn't specifically set up a anonymous function with the nice little hashtag sugar like the last one does, you can assume that it's receiving the context map. And so if you were to go to its definition, it's taking a parameter, which is the context map. The last one kind of shows a little more explicitly what's going on here if you're familiar with Clojure's anonymous functions. It's expecting the context map as the first argument, and then in this case it's setting up the location to append details to the end of whatever gets out of the context map. Does that make sense? You'll see that?
So the context is what flows down the decision graph, right?
Yes.
That's the state. As it goes from decision to decision, and it passes a context object.
It does, and each decision can manipulate the context object, and so it changes over time. And by the time it hits this location decision, there's already some details in there for it to extract and to concatenate with the /details string to make an endpoint. What other question about this so far?
So as your request comes in and proceeds, if you will, through the def resource, it's going to get changed so that the say location, customer details, location details is going to see something different than what authorized sees.
Yes, more than likely. And you can actually add more keys if you need to. For the stuff I've been doing, I added a data key in here so that if I read the body, which is often like a, I don't know what you call it, it's like a Java pipe or something like that. So you can read it once and then you're done. You can't just keep reading it over and over again. So you could store that and have a place to reference it later on.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Throwing in a var.
Yeah, like storing it in a var. And another thing to note is that you probably aren't going to do too many manipulations on the request, but you'll be building up some other stuff, maybe in the representation or another key of the context map.
That's nice.
Yeah.
And sorry,
Go ahead.
Go back. Earlier, you mentioned that you mentioned that some testing tools will follow a redirect to the end resource and give you a weird error. Does like a Clojure core testing, your regular testing, do that, or is that a different one, like Midge or something?
Okay, so we use both of those. We use Midge, and then we're using HTTP CLJ for some basic testing. And we've got some other stuff set in there, like there's some stuff we even open sourced. MOOC is the library.
Yeah.
It's like, it actually handles sessions and stuff like that. So it's as if it's going in like a browser, like a user would go into the browser. So yeah, depending on what the tool is, for some of my testing, I use the Emacs HTTP client, or the REST client, and it does follow redirects, which if you're just looking for that one little response, that's really frustrating. So then you can drop down into curl, and the REST client actually will generate curl for you, and so you can save yourself the trouble having to do that.
In my experience, I mean, I don't know if this is everybody's, but almost all, I mean, every HTTP library will follow redirects unless you tell it not to. I've never seen one that didn't by default.
Really?
Curl doesn't by default.
Curl doesn't by default.
Curl's not exactly an API. Right?
Yeah, it's not, yeah. I haven't done enough testing with the CLJ HTTP library to see if it does that yet, but for the...
I'd be shocked if it didn't. But I'm just curious if that's other people's experience.
In a browser.
A 302,
I used to use RESTful.
The redirect?
Yeah. If you call an HTTP library and you say get something and it follows a redirect, it's going to follow it
I
automatically.
think it may be controllable.
Yeah, no, it is, but I'm just saying like the default.
No, I think you have to tell it.
Yeah, not to tell it.
See, you're talking about CLJ HTTP?
Yeah.
There's like an options map that you can give to it when you're
To tell it to not do.
Yeah, or no, to tell it to follow, because it won't, I don't.
No, by default it doesn't.
I don't
Okay.
think it does.
That's,
Unless
I might be wrong, but I mean, my experience is, my expectation based on my experience at least would be, that's what it would do unless you tell it not to. I guess that's a research point. What is the default?
Yeah.
I might be misremembering.
You're right, Norman.
Yeah.
It defaults to follow.
It follows automatically.
Yeah, I mean, every HTTP library I've ever used, from memory at least, does that by default.
The examples I give in the README is if you don't want to follow redirects automatically.
Yeah, you usually have to tell it not to, or you have to tell it if you want it to do more than some set note. Like, it'll detect a redirect loop. So you usually have to tell it if you want to go past 8 or 20 or whatever the default number is for your library.
Do y'all know if it stores all the history so that you can test each redirect, I guess? What else on the context map?
So do you have an example of a context map? I mean, what's in the context? Oh, hey, there we go.
This is just a little abridged illustration of some of the values that are in there.
What's the context map? You should probably said this before. It has the whole request in it as well.
It does, yeah. That's what's in the request key, the one at the top right there.
So it's pretty close to ring.
Yeah, it actually is, and it extends ring to do its responses.
How does it?
Yeah.
But you would put your own data in here also, right? Where would you? I guess you probably.
Oh, you mean like another key? Yeah. I don't actually have a slide for that, but that is something that we're doing. We have an extra key in our API that's called data that we extract into and save it for later use. And really, I'll get into some of the best practice ideas here, but if you're parsing any params, you should probably just do that once and have another key and use it over and over again, because I didn't do that, and I ended up parsing params over and over again. So
Oh, just parse it and add it on with that.
yeah.
And then look it up later.
Yeah, and it's not just params too. Like if you're really trying, I've got a slide in here on user proofing your API. But they may include stuff that would normally be a param as data. They could do it as headers. I mean, there's all kinds of ways you could check for that kind of stuff. Okay, if you're gonna do the Liberator tutorial, which I recommend, it's really good. The last step they have in there for you is setting up the debugger that they've added to it. I guess it was a later feature, and so it's at the end of their tutorial. But you should probably do that first, just as a tip, because it's really nice to work with. It renders that graph that I was showing earlier, and it actually highlights steps, so you can watch everything flow through. It also, if you're using curl, provides a header response. So in the response, you'll see Liberator trace headers. And this is how you set it up. This is how we did it anyway. This is not how they describe it in the tutorial. If you're doing this in a production environment, then you probably are going to want to check if it's dev mode, because this is like a development feature. You wouldn't want to just turn on tracing all the time. I mean, it takes up memory, it takes up resources. So the way we did it is we checked to see if the mode is dev, and if it is, then we use this Liberator wrapper that we came up with. Questions on that?
Is mode predefined by Liberator? Is it something that you just
something that we use, yeah. And I think we're reading like environment variables in the file on the server.
Do you have an example of what does that do? I mean, do you have an?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I think it's the next slide. So the first one that I was showing there was header. It enables the Liberator response trace headers. So if you're using curl, you'll see it in your terminal output. And if you're using the UI, which I tend to just jump to and ignore the headers because it's so much easier to follow, your actual server resource will have all the traces for all the requests that you send to your resources. So this is what the terminal response looks like. The first decision is the service available? Is the method known? And it starts checking, eventually get down to authorization. And
this is showing the return values of the function?
Yes, this is included in the response from the resource. So when you add
false is what your URI too long is returning. It's not an argument.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, and so that's a good point. Some of the these decision points need a false to continue. Like a false is success and a true is failure. So you have to keep that in mind when you're working with them. Also, I think some of the primary contributors, English might not have been their first language, and so things that are called allowed versus authorized, like it kind of gets a little confusing sometimes, but you get used to it.
You said that a successful response might sometimes be false.
In this case, it was URI too long. If the URI were too long, it wouldn't be able to handle it, and so in this case it says false.
You gotta think about it as a filter.
Oh,
yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and then service available true is like maybe a more typical example. Love that hat, by the way. That is really cool. Okay, so
it just needs to keep also land the sticker on top.
I like where the original one.
So this is what the UI trace looks like. I've zoomed in a bit so you can see it. It's a large SVG, so you can get in real close to take a good look at it. The stuff that's diagrammed in these boxes is decision points for the most part. The non-colored boxes are decision points. The colored boxes are handlers at the end, which have responses. And then these oval ones are the actions that can take place on the server. And so you can see that it actually highlights the decisions that it's taking as it goes through the resource. So you can see that it wasn't trying to post something that was already there, got a false for that. It wasn't trying to put something that was already existing, got a false for that. Check to see if there's multiple representations. This is if you have a resource that maybe could be defined in different locations. False for that as well, so it's a 200 okay. If it were true for that, then you get 300 multiple responses, and they give you some links for it or whatever. So that's typically how you go through and you see what it is the Liberator is doing. And so if you get a response you didn't expect, you could real quickly go and open up this UI, and just kind of scan through it. And to me, it just feels a lot more comfortable than scanning through the terminal. Yeah. I have noticed sometimes it like fails to highlight things. I'm not sure what exactly it is that causes that, but it'll, it's got a few little issues there. Questions on this? Which I'll go. Okay, cool. All right, so setting up the routes, following up on your question about the routes, this is just Composure. So all you do is you say any route to the customer, then use this customer function, which is this def resource is defining the customer function.
So you need that for, define that for the route, right?
Good point, yes. And typically they're in separate namespaces, at least in my work.
So because of all the functionality Liberator provides, Composure just always passes on the entire request to Liberator.
Right, now you could specify, and we've talked about this, you could specify which request methods you want to allow, and maybe you could have different resources handling maybe safe and unsafe requests or whatever. But that could end up getting into some duplication of code because the resources have to specify what they can handle as well. Yeah. So you got both options really, because Composure is completely orthogonal to Liberator. Returning failure, really just returning false, because sometimes false could be success. We covered that already, but this is typically how you do it if you wanted to specify like a message to go back with it to explain what went wrong. You just pass back a vector and then include a map with the key of the message, and that'll get handled by Liberator.
So that's when when you're trying to return a Boolean, right? Like a
Yes.
decision point.
A decision point, yes.
You have stuff you want to add to the context.
Very good point. Yeah, you wouldn't want to do this with a handler or an action. You just do this with a decision point. And so if it was saying something like authorized, maybe that's the test, and they're not authorized, you could come back and say, you'll get a 401 response, and you could say, I couldn't find your API key, or I couldn't find your credentials. And you can. We'll get into some examples of how you can append these messages together. So it's not like you just get one message and then you go fix it and then you submit it again and then you get another message and they kind of mask each other. If you set it up the way I'm going to show you, then you'll get past all that. All right, get params. This is sort of along the lines of what I was talking about, trying to user-proof everything. It's looking inside the request, inside the params inside the request, and then it's selecting the context key. So this is how we get the params out of the context map. So that's one place you could have input that goes along with whatever the user's requesting. So their message could have maybe a before and after field in it, so that you know like what range of data you're looking for. It could include an API key. All that stuff could be parsed out of the params. So this is what we did for user proofing. We parsed the params, we parsed the form params, we parsed the data itself, trying to find if the users loaded anything there so that no matter where they put it, we'll be able to find it, and they won't have to go through the trouble of fitting whatever scheme we come up with. Questions so far? Okay, tip number 2, I kind of already mentioned this, but extract the params once and then store them somewhere else, maybe in like an inputs field or a data field, so that you don't have to keep doing it. Liberator, in the documentation, they recommend using the exist decision as a good place to do this. You probably want to do it after authorization. You certainly don't want to give them the potential to poke at your system and get any information out of it without going through authentication first. So just keep that in mind, however you handle it. Null and nil params can be kind of difficult to work with. Clojure has like a nice little nil question mark function to test, and there's also an empty function you can use to see if something actually has a value in it. The trouble is that users can specify null in their JSON or whatever content type they're using to send in their request, and And so they could actually, if you have like a put request or something, there's multiple fields in it, they could be trying to nil something out. And if you're doing a nil test, it'll fail in that kind of scenario. So coming up with something that actually checks through all the data and params that you've got and sees if the field is present is a much better way of handling it. Does that make sense? Okay, there's also processable functions, which I find very useful because this is where you can include messages that are useful for the user so that they know how to consume your API a little easier. You can see this thing is just pulling out the password using the get data params function I showed you earlier. And then it's checking to see if the password is strong. If it is, it returns true. This is just a Boolean test function. It's a decision. It's a decision that we're using. If you remember in the resource map, there's a processable decision. Well, you can specify a function for that. In this case, we're just going to tell it to use this function. And so if the password isn't strong, you return a vector with a false and then a message, password's weak. Okay, and then you can compose these things together so that you get a single message for all the errors that the user might have in their params. So this one's basically like some pagination stuff. So it's got a before and after time that it's looking at, and it's got limit and offset. You could check all of these using a timestamp checker or an integer checker, and then just basically concatenate all the messages together into one response. So the user gets one body back telling them exactly what they need to do. What questions you'll have on this?
Do you like this better than just putting having your messages be like an array of messages or something like that? Or
yeah, this seems to flow better for me for some reason. I mean, if any of these are nil, if they're all nil, then it's not a problem. You don't have to go through trouble of building up an array. Yeah. They typically aren't too long. Some of them might have 10 or so params that they're checking, but not that big a deal.
But message is specific to the API you're working with, right? That's not a Liberator.
No, that's Liberator.
It is?
It is, yeah.
Really? So what does it do with that then? What does message do?
It gets put into the representation, I believe, so it's part of the response.
So Liberator adjusts your representation?
Let's see. No, it was documented in here. Let's see here. I'll increase the font once I find it. So this is the example from the documentation. Check content type.
So you just wonder, it seems odd to have it where it could possibly, but it's not using that in, does it have a response, where it constructs the final response? Because so if I'm just thinking about this from a pure REST perspective, right? So you put a representation, message might not be valid for your representation.
It might not, yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. It's specific to your API, right? Message means something to your representation and your API.
Yes.
But it's not a general thing.
But it could be used for all kinds of APIs, yeah. And
I'm just saying
in there.
It's specific. That's not a Liberator thing. It's the API you're making thing.
Yeah, okay. I mean, you're gonna have to have some sort of custom description of your message, so yeah.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Cool.
I was just saying, your representation might be, it might be invalid to have a message in there in your representation. So it would be, it would surprise me if it just shows something.
Yeah, and actually, during working with this, there's been occasions where I wanted to give a message response, but handlers can't take it. Yeah. processable check. So this is just another example. I think what I was trying to illustrate here is that you can put these things into try-catch blocks. So, and that's really a good idea because if for some reason your nil check throws an exception or integer check throws an exception, you can still respond with something other than a 500 error, which is completely opaque. By the way, Liberator does wrap all of this stuff in a 500 exception, so if any of your functions fail, they're just going to get a 500 back. Okay, so another thing you could think about doing is like unifying all these processable checks. You could maybe have like one large function that looks for any possible params, assuming that they don't mean different things in different places, and validates anything that's present. And then you could have other functions that actually, check to see if required params are present. Does that make sense? I think that'd be an easier way to work with it, because if you end up doing processable functions for different resources, then you're probably going to end up having a lot of the same params getting extracted and checked over and over again. So in addition to extracting them in one place, you should probably validate most of them in one place if you can. Nasty gap. So the core contributor, so Liberator called this a nasty gap, and it really is. So somebody's getting a server crash. I haven't looked into too much detail about what the complaint is, but the description right here that makes a lot of sense is the context will not have been negotiated. The media type's not negotiated until after the decision point media type available. And what this means is, go find a decision tree. The response body has a certain type. It's JSON, it's XML, it's CSV, whatever. Liberator doesn't know what type to use until it gets down to media type available. So if you have some kind of problem that happens at any of these previous decision points, you're probably not going to get the kind of response that you're looking for. So if you're expecting a JSON response, you're probably going to get plain text. And so if you're going to adopt Liberator, this should help speed up the process. I wasted the better part of the day hunting this down.
Wait, is that not something you can do sooner? So that, I guess I don't really get the...
Yeah, that was the first thing I thought when I saw this, is why are they checking the media type so late?
I mean, if you might need to send a response immediately, wouldn't you want to know how to format that response?
Yeah, it should probably be first. Since I've been working with it, they've added this initialized context. I don't know if that's an action or what. It looks like an action since it's mobile. But it seems like media type available media type should be a decision point right here at the top, so that no matter what happens, you at least get the response type that you're expecting. But that's not the way it was designed. So what do? There's a lot of people on this thread that are crying about it until like 21 days ago, so fairly recently people are still complaining about this. It hasn't been fixed.
Out of curiosity, is this something that came over from the Erlang? Did they have that problem?
I looked at Erlang and I didn't see exactly where that was. Like it flows a little bit differently, but that's a
okay. So it's not the same decision tree.
It is not. Okay. From what I can tell, it's quite different.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No worries. So here's a workaround. Take that base resource and add all those decision points and point them to whatever response function you need to use, so that you can be assured that you'll get the right response type. And just add them all in there and you should be good to go. Some stylistic preferences. Keep your resource definitions clean. You don't want too many anonymous functions in there, especially when they start getting long beyond like 3 or so lines. It starts to get really messy. So if you imagine that resource, that def resource, it's a map, right? If maybe you have like 10 decisions and 3 actions or something that it could handle. If those 10 decisions are like 10 long functions, like you've got a really big chunk of code that you're working with right there, and that gets to be a bit unwieldy. So try to move those out to separate functions. Keep any anonymous functions pretty small. Declarative composable functions are a nice exception to this guideline. So the example I have of that, hopefully I can read this in the back, is the allowed step. So it's checking to see. I mean, you can read this pretty plainly. It's either it's a user which happens to also be requesting information on itself and using a safe method. So this is basically saying that users have read access to their own data, or it's an admin. An admin can read whatever. Got another one down here put to existing. It's just a little one-line anonymous function that's not going to pollute your resource map too much. Questions, thoughts on that? Okay, so let's do an example. Okay, so I'm doing this. We've got this UI that includes a log, and in a production environment, this would have lots of information in it besides just people logging in and out. But I want to convert this into an API, a RESTful API. You can see it's got some pagination in it. Up in the top right, you can specify a page number. And are we going over time?
No, we got plenty of time.
Okay, cool. So this is the data that we need to get back. We want to get back some information from the log and details on what's going on. So got a nice little example of a resource right here that we can use sort of as a template as we build this next one. But we like to put in comments at the beginning of all of our resources so that we can describe what we're going to in one nice little location outside of the composure. So we're going to make this endpoint user activity. So that corresponds nicely to what the UI has described over here. Okay, so we're going to do def resource, user activity. Just ignore any parameters we passed in. And then we have a base resource that we'll use. Allowed methods. What do you think?
Any chance you can zoom in or make the font
Oh,
bigger?
is it not big enough?
This. Oh, thank you.
How's that?
So you're gonna need to get it.
Get. And we can put in head options as well. Okay, allowed. Well, this one is not for users, so.
So out of curiosity, at this point, do you have a full, when you've just said get, do you have a fully functional API? I mean, it doesn't do anything, but like useful, but is it does it work at that point? Does it do something?
This one certainly doesn't because I haven't set up the composure route yet.
Okay.
But we can do that and check it.
Well, I'm just kind of curious, like you don't need, I mean, it seems like you don't necessarily need everything to have have something, right?
Yeah. Let's see. Any?
That seems like it would be a really nice way to develop if you.
Yeah, one thing I want to do more of when working with like the UI side is to mock things. I just put in some dummy data so that we can get something to work with. User activity. It doesn't read the comment, by the way, so you have to actually put that in there. So this one has a parameter. It's a URL param, so IG. And then in this org's namespace, I have created a resource called user activity, and it also takes, we can pass this over. Okay, so I mentioned earlier I use the REST client. So let's see here. So REST uses like some simple vars for text values. So I'm setting up the path using a base, which is just my server, like a prefix on the route, and then going to organizations and then the particular org that we're trying to hit. So let me just run this, and I got back a 500 error. So it doesn't look like it works yet.
No trace of the.
It didn't look like it even used Liberator, just based on that kind of response. Like I would have expected some Liberator.
No such var orgs user activity.
Did not save it? Oh. Let's see. Thank you. No, it's saved. Just reevaluated it. I'll do the same on the routes. Unknown API call. User activity. Did I misspell something?
Organization.
Org ID, user activity.
Do you need to import user activity?
I reevaluated that namespace, and that should do the trick. We can continue with the
Okay,
definition.
yeah, I didn't mean to.
We can delete it and come back and see
Yeah.
it once we got it working.
I was just curious, like if if you can really sort of iteratively develop your routes.
Yeah. So allowed. Again, this is just for org admins and admins. So even though they're an org admin, we want to make sure they're just doing something safe, even though at this point we haven't defined any unsafe methods on this resource. It is. Exists, we have a function called org exists. I'll take you to that just to show you what it is. Just it takes this org ID out of the params and then searches for the record for that org. If it finds anything, then it returns. Well, if it's not nil, it returns true. So it's just doing a not nil check as well. Okay, processable. We need a processable function. Call it processable, an extra S in there, user activity request, that's a mouthful. So what does it take as its argument? What does everything in Liberator take?
The context map.
Context map, yeah. Okay. So this one's actually gonna be really similar to the other one. So going back over here, what kind of params would you expect on an API version of this UI? You can jump around with the page number up here. Logged out. So you can see it'll jump to page 3 or page 64. So the page might be a param. Also, what's that?
Was an offset or something.
Right. So that's another type of pagination that you can use, like where you actually set offset in the database. This one was actually kind of like cannibalizing some of the stuff that was done for the UI, but it takes 2 params. The other one is the number of records on the page. So it has like a per page param. If you counted all these, there's 100. So we can reuse that readily. So we're going to use destructuring to take page and per page. And we're going to use that get data or params function I showed y'all earlier, which parses through every possible place they could put an input. And it will look for some keys. And then we can define a message. So I'm using the function definition directly underneath it as sort of a template. A lot of these end up being pretty similar. What kind of data do you expect page and per page to be?
Integers.
Integers, yeah. So we'll use the check integer functions.
Those things you wrote.
Yes, and I'll show you what they are. So all this thing is doing is checking to see if it's an integer or numeric. This is kind of like, would you call this loosely typed? Like it's as we were on the type discussion earlier, like it's not enforcing an integer, even though I'm calling it that. It's like if it's numeric, it'll work too, which is kind of cool because if the user forgets to convert it and they just take a string or something out of their UI, it'll work. But if it fails, it'll return a string. It'll tell them what the problem was. Otherwise, it's not going to do anything. It'll just return nil. And it also checks to see if there's a value. That's kind of important when you're doing these tests. If you want your params to be optional, then you should put everything in sort of a win clause, win macro. Does that make sense?
I'm just thinking, so you don't have to repeat the stir name must be numeric. Could you throw there so it gets passed down?
You could. That's a good idea. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Thank you.
So I take it there's not a good a Liberator extension for validation or anything?
Well, I think a good option would be to use the prismatic schema, but there is not a predefined type validation. So if we were doing this presentation a month from now, I'd probably have schema in here because I'm getting tired of doing this stuff by hand. So that check integer takes the value, and it also takes like a little name for it. So it's not before its page. So that it knows what to tell the user what they messed up on. There's probably a way you can write a macro to do that. And the next one is per page. Okay, so if the message is empty, what do we do? Return true, because they don't have any error messages, so we just come back and say that it's processable. And then how do we respond with false? We put it in a vector message, and whatever that concatenated message is that we came up with. Okay. I just executed that, so that's defined now in our namespace, and I'll come down here. Processable user, see we've got a lot of these to request. Okay, and then the last thing we need here is a handle okay to give a 200 response with the body. And in this case, I didn't want to have to write this in front of you. It's pretty similar, but it's got some extra stuff in it that I probably mess up on. So it's get user activity. You can see that you really should do these all in one place because I'm parsing those same exact params all over. One slight difference here is that I have some default values that I'm putting into the resource so that if they don't specify anything, by default they're going to go to the first page and there's going to be 100 records per page. So you can see that right here. Also, because we weren't like strictly typing the integer, we're kind of loosely typing it, and you can be numeric, which means it could be a string with like value in it. We need to take those values and map them over to integers. So I have a map vals to integer function that just takes any possible numerics and converts them into integers. And you can see the response down here. It's just a map. Results will be whatever results come back from this. It's actually a query that's hitting a database. And then it'll include the page number, the number per page, which is either from the user or it's the default that we specified. And then it'll also count all the records. They have a page count, and they can know like how far between these pages they can navigate, what their endpoints are. Okay, so handle okay is get user activity. Okay, so moment of truth. See if we can get anything back. Unknown API call. We still got the same problem we had earlier. Let's see here. In the routes. Just don't look behind the curtain. So you want to make sure that your resources are plural. That's one of the common constraints for REST. Turn this off. What was that? Oh, that's just a comment. Loud.
There's a difference there.
What's that? The diff is allowed methods, get head options. There's another diff. So the first diff is the comment. Was this thing I thought it was fixing? That's right, I'm not sure why. Yeah. Okay, so evidently I was messing up the permissions somehow, but as a param, I told it 5 records per page and give me the first page. So you can see that it's just coming back with the log records like we saw in the UI. It also tells me that there's 1,277 pages. So I could jump to the end. And get the last records.
Oh, and there's your Liberator trace there.
Yeah, it's got the X Liberator trace, and if you were to jump over to the UI and refresh the page, you'll see the GET request that I just sent over. So we could follow through these and see why it failed or why it succeeded, and get a quick understanding of the path that Liberator took to reach the response that it gave us. Okay, so that's, well, you had a question about what if we got rid of the rest of the resource definition. So let's go down here and just get rid of the rest of it.
You're just going to get an empty response, is what I'd expect, depending on what's in base resource.
Yeah. Trying to convert.
That's something from your base resource.
Yeah.
JSON C is response.
Yeah, I have that for all kinds of stuff in the base resource.
Okay.
So I'm not sure which handler's triggering that.
Well, you could look at your UI.
Sure could. Doing it okay. I guess it needs some data different than what it's getting at this point.
But your OK is the JSON C is response, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's something in that code.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
maybe we can put something in there so that it at least gives a response.
Resource.
Yeah, and then we get a quick mock-up.
I was just curious. But have you done it like that, or have you just sort of like built it all up and then started testing it?
Usually I get in the permissions and a handler for whatever kind of response I'm working with. But then it might build out from there, like when you start adding extra methods like put and post and delete, that's when it kind of expands. Should still work. Good.
Are you supporting other content types? This is just JSON here. This is JSON here.
Yeah, it's just JSON. It'll also handle, well, for the responses, that's all we're doing right now.
With Liberator, I mean, because that was my understanding is Liberator's
Liberator
supposed to make it pretty easy. Right?
Yeah, out of the box, it has support for basic JSON. We're using JSON C, so it's a little different. It also supports plain text, CSV, XML. It's actually got pretty good support. There's even some little add-in libraries you can get for transit if you're interested in going full stack Clojure. Let's see where that is. So out of the box, it can do text plain, HTML, JSON, Eden, text CSV, and tab separated values as well. Okay, so that's how you add an endpoint with Liberator. So, questions on that? Okay. You can get as sophisticated as you want with testing. This is a really simple way of doing it. The two libraries that I'm using are Cheshire and CLJ HTTP. Let's see here. We've got API GET, which uses HTTP's GET request, and you've also got put request. These take a request message, a URL, and then a body, just like any other HTTP request where you're just constructing HTTP requests. So this is how you construct. This is how I constructed the message. Now it takes an API key in here, so I pass that in and I just merge it. I've got like a base URL that I work with for all my APIs. They all start with API v3, so I build out from there. And so I pass in the API key, the path, which is user activity in the last example that we had, and then a body, which could include things like page, per page. Other bodies could include all the things we talked about, or whatever API params you want to include. And then I'm also just using a simple function to read the JSON in the response. Okay, so instead of writing it for you, I'll show you what I wrote. Okay, so in my test suite, I can't say for sure what the last action was. These things run multi-threaded, but I can check to see that I'm getting a valid response whenever I search for the activity log on a test organization, which is what we're running on here. So I know that my test org is 89. Normally you would parse this kind of stuff, which we normally do, but for illustrations, know that we've got the 89th org set up for testing. I've got my test path, which is organizations, test org, which could be changed, and then the user activity. This is the exact same API we're just working on. So the first thing I do is I check for the response for default, assuming there's no params, and then I pass in a bad param, like 2. So if we go back over here and spell this out, we would expect to get a 422 response saying the per page value must be numeric. Again, like we were talking about earlier, if you messed up the other param, it would include that as well. So it's saying the page value must be numeric and the per page value must be numeric. So you can append your messages like this. Okay, so then I test a couple of valid values. And you can see it'll take an integer of 2, or it'll take a string of 2 if they forget to parse it. Then I got a bad request. I'm just passing in 10 per page, spelled out. And then I run all these through, and I'm just doing CLJ Clojure.test is equal to this. So it's just some basic test cases. So that's what it looks like when you test one of these. And let's see here. We can open up the RESTful. So it takes it a second because it's loading up Midge. We use that for some other tests, and then evaluates everything. Then it runs its tests. So this is a automated test suite. It's hard to see, and I don't know how to expand the mini buffer, but it says it ran 59 tests with 0 failures. So now if we go back over, to the traces, you can see all of the automated testing requests show up in here. So if one of them failed, you could jump to it real quick and see what the problem was. Some useful libraries. If you're building an API, our company's released the Turnstile library, so that's a good one. We use it. For validation, Prismatic Schema library will save a lot of headache. We're definitely going to start using that. And I mentioned REST client earlier. If you're a Vim user, there's something called HTTP client, which from what I've seen of their little animated GIF on their GitHub page, it looks to do just about the same thing. Next steps, I would recommend, if you're interested in this, take the Liberator tutorial and then build your own API. That's it.
If I have problems with that turnstile, can I call you at 2 o'clock in the morning and say, "Dar"?
No, but I do have a commit on it, so I know a little bit about it. I can help you with it if you're stuck.
I'll call Norman.
I thought you were going to say you can offer a support contract for a small fee.
That's always an option, yes.
So, after having used it for a while, does it hold up?
Yeah.
Do you think it?
It's so much better than doing this by hand with just like composure routes. That's a nightmare. My predecessors did that, and I can't believe they went through that kind of hell. It's rough.
Cool.
Thanks.
So next month, Steve has volunteered to give a short talk, not a full talk, on API testing and API with Clojure. Does anybody want to jump up now and just say that empty space, after Steve's talk, you just want to fill it with your Clojure knowledge?
You should, because otherwise it'll degenerate to be
I
random.
missed it. Maybe it was March, I think it was. And so I don't know if I can do the next one, but at some point.
Okay.
I have something semi-prepared.
Okay, cool.
So.
All right, so confirmed you'll be there here.
Confirmed in the future.
Confirmed for a specific day. Excellent. Anybody else? So if you're here, if when you get closer, let us know.
I'll let you know.
Anybody else have anything they want? All right, well, we'll figure out something then. Cool. Downstairs, I guess.